What is the doctrine of original sin, and is it true? My name's Wes Ellis. I'm the pastor of First Congregational Church of Ramona, and the doctrine of original sin goes all the way back at least to Augustine, Augustine of Hippo, St. Augustine, or Augustine, if you will. And he is really the main developer of this doctrine as we understand it. And the basic idea is that sin, the condition of being sinful and of human guilt, is something that precedes even your birth. You were born into this. We were born into sin. All human beings are sinners. Now, there were specific mechanics of this that were developed in different places, different times throughout church history. The mechanics of this being passed through the bloodline, through the male, through all kinds of different theories that came to preserve certain other commitments about Christology, about the perfection of Jesus, and things like that. But the essential idea is that human beings are all sinners. Now, you have to remember that prior to about the 1800s, before the kind of emergence of voluntarism and individualism as we understand it, the idea of original sin still kept God in the center of the story. But as human beings became kind of the central figures of the whole biblical and theological narrative of salvation, this idea came to take on some pretty dark and terrible implications. Original sin actually became the rationale behind a lot of really terrible violations of human rights throughout history. So this idea has been rejected by a lot of people, but it does still lend itself to some sympathy for the basic idea. I think it may be better to think about original sin rather than thinking about it as this transmission of guilt from the parents down to the child, that when a baby enters the world, they are guilty of sin on an individual level. I think it may be better to think about this as we are all born into a world that is broken, and we are all born with some relation to the sinfulness of the world. And therefore, we are all born in to sin. A example of this, hopefully that you'll find helpful, is systemic racism. Racism is not just a commentary on your relationship with individuals, on an individual's relationship with other people of other races. For example, the "I have a black friend" argument doesn't actually excuse anyone from being complicit in systemic racism. Whenever we're born into the world, we're not born as blank slates. We're born into a narrative, into a story, and therefore into relation with other people that we as individuals didn't necessarily choose, and therefore have no personal guilt connected to it, but are bearing the guilt of the history into which we are born. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the famous World War II theologian, talked about bearing the guilt of the nation, bearing the guilt of humanity, even though in many respects, Bonhoeffer was not guilty himself of the horrors of the Holocaust, but he did not excuse himself from guilt for it. So none of us can excuse ourselves from the fact that we're born into a broken world, and that sin, whether or not we personally commit it, is still our responsibility. Jesus shows us this. Jesus, if the confession, the kind of dogmatic confession that Jesus was without sin is true, then Jesus shows us that even though you are not guilty of sin, sin is still your responsibility. Jesus took responsibility for the sin of the world, even though he himself was not personally guilty of it. So, in that framework, I don't think the doctrine of original sin has to be problematic. In fact, I think it can give us a proper understanding and a proper humility toward the brokenness of our world, that this is not somebody else's problem, that these issues are not somebody else's to deal with, they are ours. And because of the nature of grace and the nature of sin, we need rescue as much as the next person. We are all subject to the guilt of sin and therefore in need of the grace of God. Whether or not you are guilty of sin, original sin is not concerned with whether or not a baby actually did something wrong or something. All people have entered into a world that they themselves cannot fix on their own. And in some sense, all bear some complicity to the pain and suffering around us. So the doctrine of original sin actually has the potential of helping us empathize with our neighbors, helping us love our neighbors even more because we can see that what's in them is in us and that we all, in fact, share in this human condition of being both saints and sinners and being objects of God's grace and also in need of that grace. So I hope that helps. I don't mind if you decide for various historical or theological reasons to give up on the doctrine of original sin. Maybe that term just carries too much baggage, but perhaps it can help you understand that whether or not you have sinned, the sin of the world, the brokenness of the world, the suffering around us, the injustice we see around us, uh, is ours to deal with, and that we are never free until everyone is free.